Hello and welcome. Thank you all very much for taking the time tonight to come and attend the Folens Make a Difference webinar. My name's Adam Brophy. I work for Folens. I'm the publisher on this project. I've had the pleasure over the last guts of a year to work with Conor and Máirín on this new edition. Conor and Máirín, as I'm sure you know, are two names synonymous with CSPE in this country. Partly because of the four previous editions of this very popular title, and also because of the work that they've done themselves in both CSPE and citizenship in Ireland, which I'll leave to them to explain a little bit more detail next. My job tonight is simply to introduce them, to say welcome to all of you lot, and explain the agenda for tonight. So first off, Conor and Máirín are going to spend some time talking about CSPE, talking about why we decided to do a new edition of this book, mainly because it's been a time of such upheaval, it's such a change in the world and in Ireland, that it's important to keep a book like this up to date and relevant for teachers and for students in the country, the ones that are using this for junior cycle. And also the fact that there has been a change in the wellbeing guidelines, which have been updated in 2021, and also that the CSPE specification itself has had updating just this month, which is very timely for this new book. So as they are the stars of the show, I'll hand over to them in a second. If you have any questions as they go through their presentation, please feel free to tap your thoughts or comments or queries into the chat box, which should be visible on your screen. We'll keep a log of those, and then when the presentation is over, we'll make sure to address any queries that you have, and the guys will endeavour to make sure that you're happy with any confusion you might have. From the Folens perspective, to show our gratitude for you turning up tonight, we've entered all attendees into a prize draw for what I've been assured is a gourmet food and drink hamper, and I'll announce a winner at the end. And at that point as well, we'll also let you know how you can contact your local rep, make contact with us so you can get your hands on a free copy of the book. So for now, I'll hand over to Máirín, I think is going to speak first, and I'll talk to you again later on. Good luck, guys.
Okay, thanks. It's actually me first, Adam, but that's fine. Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure for both Máirín and I to be with you this evening. And thank you very much to Adam and to Aoife and to Bridget, who are looking after the webinar for us this evening. Yes, it's a joy to be with you, and particularly we're all spending so much time on screen. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. By way of introduction, Máirín and I know each other for, I won't even mention the number of years, but we know each other for quite a long time. And we got to know each other first through our work on the CSPE support service as we introduced teachers across the country to the new subject as it was at the time. And we've both been working in the CSPE space pretty much non-stop since then. I'm currently teaching CSPE methods in Maynooth University and in UCD, and facilitating some CPD in schools. And I'm going to hand over now to Máirín.
Thanks, Conor. And just to add my voice to that, to say good evening to everybody and how much we appreciate you being here today, this evening with us. Just a little bit about who I am. So I begin my CSPE story when I first taught CSPE and then left the classroom to join the CSPE support service, which, as Conor mentioned, that's where we met. I did some work then and some research too on assessment in CSPE when it was a state exam. Currently, I'm working part-time on the graduate diploma in inclusive education, learning support and special education, and I also then deliver a CSPE course to PME students in Trinity. So that's just a little bit about who we are. I suppose that's just to let you know that we're people who have been involved in CSPE from the get-go, and even more so people for whom CSPE is really important. So I'm going to move into the session. The way we decided to deliver this evening, we're just going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, is we decided to look at some of the key questions about the subject and to think about what matters if you're teaching CSPE, if you have been teaching it or if you're about to teach it. So I suppose if you've been teaching it for years, this is a bit of a refresher. And if you're about to begin teaching it, well, then this maybe is a reminder or just a setting out for you what's important in CSPE, and on into looking at a couple of the kind of key areas around the subject itself. So one of the first things that's important, I suppose, is meeting the requirements of the specification, and that Conor has mentioned, or Conor will talk more to you about it, but Adam has mentioned the fact that the specification has been updated, and we're going to talk about that later. The idea of CSPE and the well citizen is an important one. The current iteration of CSPE has it within the umbrella of the suite of subjects under that well-being heading. And CSPE is part of that suite for a reason. And it's about, I suppose, the idea that the students that we have, when we think of their well-being, we think of their physical health and their mental health. But really, really important is that they're well in terms of understanding the society in which they live and the world in which they live, the way in which the world is today. That contributes to their well-being. In fact, it would be hard to imagine being well in the world without an understanding of how the world works. The focus in CSP is on contemporary society, what's happening in the world today. And in fact, if I take the next point with that, we talk about enabling students to read the world. That's what CSPE is aiming to do. That's the purpose of it. Every subject on the curriculum has a purpose. So you're coming perhaps from different subject backgrounds. You'll be aware of the purpose of your subject on the curriculum. And the purpose of CSPE on the curriculum is to enable students to read the world. Again, we think about literacy and numeracy as being very much part of the work of the school and the work of education. And very much embedded in that is the literacy that's needed to read the world, to understand what's happening in the world. And that's more than just reading the text, but it is also being able to understand the text and the numeracy in the world around. Young people have tremendous energy, tremendous enthusiasm, and engaging students and tapping into that, empowering them, helping them to see the world and to see their place in it, so that they're not going to be indifferent or apathetic. Now, I think in recent years, the work that has gone around climate change has seen young people becoming more and more aware. But CSPE is interested in lots of different themes and different areas, all that's happening in contemporary society, and engaging students and motivating students to be a part of that. There's a kind of a saying that it goes with CSPE that says, you know, we cannot produce active citizens if all of their learning is passive. So really important is engaging students and getting students active, and that involves active teaching and active learning. Capturing the learning is important in CSP, as it is in all of the subjects in the junior cycle, and Conor will come back and talk to you more about that. I mentioned early on that CSPE is a subject within its own right, and that holds, that's very true. But in a lot of schools today, more and more schools, a subject, the politics and society subject, is taking off. And CSPE, if you're in such a school, CSPE can serve as kind of a way of forging some links, setting down some foundations for students who will go on subsequently to study politics and society. So what we have done after each of the questions that we have posed around CSP is just taken a few snapshots from the Make a Difference book or from the student book to just say, so here's about well-being, here's about helping students to see where being a well citizen fits into their well-being. The page there with the well in the middle of it looks at what do you need to be physically well, what do you need to be socially well, What do you need to be mentally well? And then what do you need to be a well citizen? So putting that into the mix when it comes to well-being. And the iceberg there, again, picking out some of those key words where well-being really is, where citizenship and being a well citizen is the focus. The three strands of the subject are the kind of cornerstone of the specification. And those three strands, color-coded the way they are there, the rights and responsibility, global citizenship, and exploring democracy. Again, they're the way in which the book is laid out, so that the strands you need to cover to meet the specification are all there very, very clearly outlined. The data there serves two purposes, because data is part of the politics and society kind of brief, but this is also about reading the world, and it's also about contemporary issues, because this is looking at fast fashion, a topic that's kind of very current nowadays. The image of the Black Lives Matter, that's to get students thinking. Looking at those two images, again, a very contemporary issue. What's it saying? Getting the students thinking and talking, again, at the heart of CSPE. Adam mentioned about all that has happened in the world, and COVID very definitely is factored into the view of the world that CSPE needs to encompass. And so there are activities and there are references to COVID where appropriate in the book, but this book is not about COVID, it's not about the pandemic, but this is just, again, it's a diagram about the SDGs and how they have been impacted by COVID. And the last page there is about the key thinkers. Again, that language, key thinkers, is in politics and society, but for students who are learning about the world, this is about who has things to say about it and what things they have had to say and how that might be relevant to today's world. The next question we're looking at is, what do you need to teach CSPE? So we did a kind of a brainstorm around what do you think you need to teach CSPE? So we did this brainstorm a long time ago, and we updated. So you need a scheme of work. You need learning intentions. You need to be able to show what it is you're hoping to do with your students in every single lesson. Key words, again, we're looking at the whole notion of literacy and that reading the world. Then you need contemporary content and knowledge, because there is a knowledge base to CSPE. You need to know what the key skills are and how you're going to meet some of those kind of standards in terms of the junior cycle key skills that have been kind of produced by the NCCA. You need activities to engage and motivate. We've mentioned that already. And in today's world, we need digital and online support in order to teach CSPE. PowerPoints, ideally, that would capture some of the learning. Homework activities, so that they have to be put together so that students you can extend the work that you're doing. Class tests and house exams, because they come up twice a year in most schools. You need to do an action, because the specification requires an action with each strand. And then in terms of the CBA and assessing an action record, you need to have some plans for that. Before I move on to the next slide, this is the signposts there are one way in which you might begin to think about a scheme of work. And the teacher's guide, which will come with Make a Difference, will talk you through that and talk more about how to put together a scheme of work and lay one out more or less for you. The idea then of key language and learning intentions, that's just an example of them. So they're there. You know that CSPE in Make a Difference, we have decided to reproduce it in 101 lessons. So there's 101 lessons kind of targeted at an hour, and with activities then that you could select from if your class periods were less than that. We have some digital material in it. There's really interesting Maslow and the Lion King. So that's looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the Lion King. And if you Google that, you'll also find that you may have the option of doing Maslow and Finding Dory, because they're really interesting ways of looking at for students to explore Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There are case studies then in the book that are going to help you to get, or to your students to get inside the story of someone's life and some experiences that somebody has had. This one here of Farash, there's two stories, true stories, that are unaccompanied minors, two unaccompanied minors, and their journey these two unaccompanied minors, the same age as our first years when they headed out on their journey and ended up in Ireland. And this is their story. And then the one at the bottom here, again, it's just a contemporary issue. It's looking at social influencers, and it's looking at Tyke Fleming. We also have Ryan Kingy there as well. So looking at contemporary issues that are hopefully going to grab the attention and motivate young learners. Then we have some quizzes. There's a quiz there, how green are you? So you can do that and fill in the score and see how green you are. Or up here, the word consumerism, where the students are asked to name the global companies and the brands hidden inside them. What these are trying to do is to provide you, the teacher, with all the activities that you need to kind of get the students thinking, engaged and active. The steel then looking at democracy and issues around democracy in America and beyond. So Conor is going to take up there with you now on how you teach CSPE.
Okay. Thank you, Máirín. Máirín has kind of given us the overview of the course content. Then it comes to actually teaching the course. Máirín has mentioned how important it is already to read the world and to have those literacy, numeracy and other skills necessary to read the world and then function within it. It's really important as well that it's not a subject where students are just passively engaged, as already stated. So they actively get engaged, and through the book and through the student activity book, there are lots of ways in which students can get actively engaged. Plus, in the teacher's guide, we have a whole section on active teaching methodologies. So if you're not sure about some of those things, or perhaps you've been doing it, there might be some new ideas for you in the teacher's guide. Máirín has mentioned the importance of the knowledge content. And again, we're very aware that some teachers are landed with CSP, if I can use that phrase, and they might not necessarily have all the subject knowledge. So the subject knowledge is built in to the textbook and the student activity book. We're also very keen that students get opportunities to discuss, to explore attitudes, sometimes to challenge attitudes, but most importantly, to respect and to understand that people have different attitudes and approaches. Teamwork is a really important part of it. So through our active methods, we do teamwork. Through our actions, we do teamwork as well. We're trying to encourage students as well to develop their thinking skills, and you'll see in the next slide some of the ideas around that. We're very conscious as well that when students are undertaking action, that they do some research, find out a little bit more about whatever the issue they're interested in is. And also that they reflect on their learning, they reflect on the skills they've learned, and they reflect on the actions they have taken. I feel a bit like Gay Byrne because I'm going to say to Máirín, next slide, please. So in this particular slide, one of the words that actually you couldn't see on the slide, or I certainly couldn't see on mine, was the word fun. And fun is a really important element of CSPE. Actually, it's a really important element of learning, I think. So we've embedded in the text many different illustrations, photographs, and cartoons. And here are just a few of them. Some of them are on incredibly topical subjects like the environment, there's voting, there's child soldiers, and even those of you who might be fans of, or maybe not fans of, Brendan O'Carroll will see there's a photo there of a poster of Agnes Brown, which might stimulate some interesting discussion. Next slide, please, Máirín. When we were talking about developing critical thinking and developing attitudes, throughout the textbook, you'll find these quick question ideas where students are asked to think about an issue as they're learning. And it's interesting in that we put this presentation together earlier in the week, and if you look at the bottom right hand image, how unfortunately it's timely with the dreadful tragedies that have been happening with weapons in the United States this week and last week. So we're dealing with those kind of issues and you know, thinking about what it means for a society. Also, we're really keen that students, as I said already, develop an understanding for other perspectives. So scattered throughout the textbook we have On the Other Hand, where we're asking students to really think about other people's views on an issue. And just to mention one of them on your screen there, there's too much interference in people's freedom from all the rules and laws we have now. And again, if you think about that in the context of the current crisis or emergency we're living through, we know that people are thinking about all of the regulations and the restrictions in the context of a question like that. Your Turn is scattered throughout as well, where we're asking students to think about some of the kind of messages that we're putting across in the textbook, and we're giving them real examples to which they can apply their learning. Next slide, Máirín, please.
Okay. So this is then what about action? Because action is very much at the heart of CSPE. And of course, it's also mentioned in the specification at the end of each strand to kind of undertake an action. The basic idea in terms of action is that it's student-led, is that it's something which the students take the lead and they carry out an action. It's meant to be something that's purposeful and meaningful to them, something that will engage them and motivate them and make them kind of enthusiastic about what they're doing. It has to be something manageable. So action is meant to be something that has, you know, has a kind of a beginning, middle and end to it. Sometimes with young people, they want to, we'll say, tidy the county rather than tidy up the yard and the local area. They can think very big, and that's wonderful. That's youth for you. But it only needs to be something very manageable. And I'll show you maybe examples of what I mean in a moment. It's meant to empower. It's meant to have a purpose. It's meant to give students kind of a sense of purpose around what they want to do. It could be a response to contemporary event. It should be definitely rooted in the real world. And ideally, the idea for the action comes from the students. So in terms of you're doing something with the class, they're really interested, you sense a level of interest, and you say, what about we do an action project around this? But we know that in reality, that may not happen. That may not happen, that students are going to suddenly feel really enthusiastic about something. So the idea then is that you have to maybe come forward with ideas that students maybe can select from, or that they can vote on, or they can research and come up with a plan then around some idea. There are steps then. So how do you go about doing an action once you've decided, yeah, this is what we want to do? And then how do you go about reporting it? So we've divided it into 7 steps for taking action. And we have guidance then for each one of those steps. I'm not going to go into it now. I suppose I'm just saying to you, what you need is to be able to think about it in steps. And one way of thinking it are these 7 steps that are embedded in the book and in the action chapter, which is chapter 12. So there is the 7 steps applied to organising a school election. The jigsaw here is how you might put groups together in order to do a survey on a topic. Because the idea is, once you've picked your theme, once the students have agreed on what it is they want to do, then it's dividing up the work and what you need to do in order to make the action happen. And the guidance is there in the textbook for that. Throughout the book, we have these little cartoons at the end of every chapter where there's a kind of a conversation between a group of students thinking about what we could do now that we've come to the end of this particular topic. So they're throughout the book, and it'll tell you at the bottom there, so if one of those catches the attention of your students and you want to do that, this is your chance to do it, and go to chapter 12, which will give you suggestions then for how that might happen. in this edition of the book, there are a series too of young activists cartoons. We're really, really pleased with how these have come out. So there's Malala Yousafzai here, and there's Emma Thompson, there's Greta Thunberg, and then there's some less known people. There's William Kamkwamba, the guy who harnessed the wind, Bana Ablad. So there's a whole series of these, and again, something around their story might trigger an interest in your students, and they could become a trigger for action. We have sample actions then in chapter 12 for you to look at, and what other schools have done and how they have done their actions. So this is this is the SDGs in school in Waterford who did this, and they put together this huge wheel which is on the stairwell in their schools. The top picture is of a school, I think the school's in Carrigaline, and they made cards and they sent them to the local nursing home during COVID at Halloween time. And the bottom slide are students in Firhouse counting the votes in an election that they had organised in the school. So action projects can take many different shapes or forms. There are pages of suggestions and titles for action in the teacher's guide, so that if you wanted to do an action on a particular theme with your students, weren't too sure, looking for ideas for them, there are pages of suggestions for you there. And then in the student book, we have put in pages, a chapter of templates that can help students to think about and plan doing their action so that they get as much out of it as they possibly can. And included in this is also a record, but Conor will tell you more about that later. But things like tips for doing an interview, or keeping records like minutes if they have a committee or a group meeting, or making their own kind of, we'll say, album of photographs around the various actions that are various steps in their action. So Conor, back to you.
Thank you, Máirín. One of the other questions, I suppose, that we were thinking about is how do you manage assessment within CSPE? And when we talk about assessment there, we're talking about the two very common forms, assessment for learning and assessment of learning. And when it comes to assessment for learning, in other words, the formative ongoing assessment, you'll find activities throughout the book in the form of quick questions. Also, there's another heading that we use, and we've a whole series of little icons at the beginning of the book. Another feature is called Your Turn. So where we're getting students to apply the learning from some other aspect of the lesson. So that's part of the formative assessment. Also the homework activities, which I'm going to show you in a few moments. We're encouraging group work, pair work, group work, class work, and individual work, and that allows opportunities for peer assessment and peer work. But also we have, at the end of every chapter, we have this self-assessment exercise, and we call it Reflect. And our questions are based on Rolf's critical reflective model. So you might see at the very top of the slide in the blue, it says what. So there's a series of kind of what questions which are really testing students' understanding of the information and the knowledge they've learned. But the questions that we'd love you to consider as well are the ones that follow in the box at the bottom. So what is about what are the implications of what students have learned about in this lesson for the school, the local community, the country, and the wider world. And then the very last bit, now what, is to prompt and stimulate that idea that students can do something about some of these issues, individually or collectively, as groups of students, or even as a whole class, or perhaps even as part of a year group doing something around action. Then it's really important as students do action, and also as they're doing exercises and activities that they find interesting and exciting, that they record that work in some way. Just like in any other subject, they record their learning as they go. And one of the recommendations is that students put together some kind of a portfolio. It could be a digital portfolio. It could be a very old style scrapbook type activity, or it might be a folder where they gather and collect bits and pieces that they enjoyed, that they feel very proud of. You could even call it like a collection of evidence of the experiences that they've had along the way. The other thing that a portfolio does as well is it helps students to celebrate their learning, to think about all those things they enjoyed, events they had, actions they took. We've also built in these designated days, and inside the front cover of the book you'll find a calendar of all of these events. They sometimes provide a wonderful opportunity to celebrate learning. I'll give you one example, the International Human Rights Day, which happens in December, which is very timely because students might have just finished some learning or be finishing learning on human rights, and now they can celebrate and inform the school community. Homework, of course, is another way of checking in on the learning. It's summative in terms of it's the end of that piece of learning, and then tests, exams, and all of that, and the end of chapter review are the summative learning as well. Next slide, Máirín. Thank you. So on the left-hand side, you'll see one of those designated days taken from the student activity book. It's a day dedicated to experiencing, celebrating, critiquing. We don't always have to be in favor of something. It's about looking at democracy, International Day of Democracy, which takes place in September. Great opportunity of bringing the learning together. Another example there is the quick question. So we've learned something about the law. What does it mean then when somebody says no one is above the law? How do we apply our learning to that? And in the homework, there are two types of homework. Some homework activities link back to the student activity book, and some are standalone pieces of homework, like the example that the cursor is over there at the bottom. Okay, next slide, Máirín, please. And in this one, two things just to demonstrate. On the left-hand side, you'll see it says mugging witness report. So the students will have been learning in their lesson about the law and about crime and about punishment and all of that, and the importance of accounts that people give when crimes happen. So here they're given an image and they're asked to write their own account on the image based on the learning that they've been doing. So they're applying their learning, another opportunity for formative assessment here. And on the right-hand side, at the end of every strand in the student activity book, we've basically done a review, and there's two elements to it. The top piece has a series of 10 bullet points, which are key aspects of the particular strand. And then the bottom piece is about the key skills, the junior cycle key skills. And we're really asking students to think back about the skills they've used in this strand and to identify at least two of them that they'd like to work on in the future. So they can acknowledge the ones they've used and then think about two they'd like to work on in the future. Okay, thanks, Máirín. Next one. So one of the questions that's often asked is, so what about CSPE within well-being? And Máirín touched on some of this at the very beginning. Well-being, as Máirín said, is not just about what people think of first, personal health, mental health, physical well-being. It's all about that idea of, let me mention a few things, the idea of student voice, of student agency, of developing confidence, of developing resilience, of developing a can-do attitude and a growth mindset, of thinking about the collective well-being. So what about my community? What about my society? Do I have the skills to interact with politicians, with activists, with community organizations? And also, what about the well-being of this planet that we live on? What are we doing that's helpful in terms of a healthy planet? What are we doing that's unhelpful? And how do we create a more just and sustainable society? So it's all of that, and it fits within well-being, but it's also a distinct area of study. And it's now required to be 100 hours from next September, whatever way you're teaching CSP at the moment. That circular letter 0076/2020 says that from next September, you should be giving 100 hours to CSPE within well-being in your school. The spec, we were all working off the 2016 specification, and it has been revised. I have to reassure you and say there hasn't been huge change, but there have been some changes. And want to reassure you as well that Máirín and I have factored in those changes to the textbook and the student activity book. And we're currently rewriting aspects of the teacher's guide to make sure that everything fits with the new guidelines and the specifications. So you can rest assured that we've done all the thinking around that for you to make things a little bit easier. Another thing that often comes up is the well-being indicators, and you might remember those 6 different indicators that appear. And I know Máirín and I had real difficulty with the active one, because the active one was only about physical activity in the past. In the new CSP spec, active now has a footnote which says that active is all about being an active citizen, voicing your opinion, engaging in active learning. And that's a really positive development from our perspective. The key skills of the junior cycle, I've mentioned already, they're throughout, and they're all part of well-being and becoming a fully rounded person. And Máirín touched on already, literacy and numeracy are obviously scattered throughout every aspect of the book. Just 2 quick examples, Máirín, if you go to the next slide. Well-being, there are several activities. I'm only referring back to ones that Máirín mentioned at the very beginning. So there are well-being activities stitched in. And the page on the right is taken from the new specification, and you will see echoes of that in the teacher's guide, which basically is saying with each of the learning outcomes, which of the indicators are being dealt with. And if you just scan visually without even reading the text there, you can see that across all aspects of CSPE, those indicators are well and truly addressed. I think that's our run through. Did you want to add anything, Máirín?
No, absolutely not. I think we're ready to hand back to Adam.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Lovely. Thanks, guys. Thank you, and well done. I think for anybody watching that, you can see the depth of effort that you put into pulling this program together. I mean, I publish books across the whole subject spectrum, and it's really impressed me just watching just the time and the lengths that you've gone to find interesting material that will engage kids and teachers, of course, and to ensure that, I suppose, I know from speaking to you that what you're aiming for all the time is to try and create active citizens out of the kids doing this course. So it really comes across to me when you present that, the effort that you've put into making the book try to achieve that. So well done.
Thank you.
Everybody else, welcome. If you want to get your hands on a copy of Make a Difference, if you go to folens.ie, you'll be presented with an automated text box that comes up that will take your details, and if you put in CSPE as one of your subjects, you will be sent a copy. But if you want to get in touch directly with a rep, you can click a link at the bottom of the homepage of folens.ie that will take your roll number and will direct you to the relevant rep. You can either contact them or contact customer service to order a book if you prefer that, or if you'd like one of them to come out to your, well, they obviously can't come out to your school, but to arrange a call with you and any other CSPE teachers in your school to go through the Make a Difference program, they'll be more than happy to do that as well. So it's very easy to get in touch with them, and any information that you want can be gotten through them, or any presentation that you'd like on the program, they're delighted to do that for you. We've had a few questions come through, so I'm going to run through these quickly, guys, before I let you go. Let me see. One that's come in is, I'm not teaching third years, but do they have to complete a CBA for CSPE this year? Conor, Máirín, do you know, do they have to, third years have to complete a CBA this year?
All I can tell you is I'm not aware that they don't.
Yes.
Okay, so there hasn't been any indication that they don't have to do it.
I haven't heard anything other than that. Yes.
Okay. So that sounds like just to continue on with the standard process until you hear otherwise. Another question, is that 100 hours of CSPE whether you are doing the short course or short course subject? So that sounds like, do you have to do the 100 hours of CSPE whether or not you're doing the short course?
Okay.
And I suppose
so
just to incorporate a second question. So I'm going to pull two questions into one here, Conor. One is, can you clarify the 100 hours of CSP? Is that for the short course or for full course? And on a similar topic, how many 40 minutes periods of CSPE are required over the 3 years? So I presume if you could say how many CSP classes will be required a week to cover those hours over the 3 years.
Okay, thank you for the question. And circular, I just want to refer to the circular, and it is really worth studying, and particularly page 5. That's circular letter 0076/2020. Now I'm going to give you the answer, but if you need further reference points, please look at that circular letter. So there was confusion over the last couple of years, depending on where you're doing the short course, where you're doing your own course, where you're teaching the old CSP syllabus. So this circular letter makes it incredibly clear. It says you can only teach the short course specification from next September. And the short course specification and our book is written with 100 hours in mind, okay? So that's to be really clear on that. The second part of the question, or the second question, Adam, was about how might those 100 hours be spread out, okay? Exactly. So if you're teaching 40-minute lessons, it works out at, if I can put it this way, in first year you might have 2 periods of CSPE a week, in second year you might have 1 period of CSPE a week, and in third year you might have 2 periods of CSPE a week. Or change it any way you will, but that there are 2 years when you have 2 periods a week and 1 year when you have 1 period a week. If you have hour-long classes, it's 1 hour-long class per week over each of the 3 years. And the way we're working that out is there are 33 weeks in the school year. So you might tell me then, okay, well, we're short 1 hour. Well, so be it. That's the way it's worked out anyway.
And you might find that the action that you take will fill in that hour, that kind of spare hour.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, guys. We're teaching CSP as a subject, so no longer an exam, and we don't give it any respect anymore. Nothing gets put on the junior cycle certificate. Is that right? Seems such a shame that we were working so hard and now we don't do much at all. So it seems that the feeling in the school is that since it's doesn't have an exam to it anymore, that it doesn't get the respect that it deserves. Would that be something that you've found?
Or do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think the status of CSP has always been a bit of a struggle, even when there was an exam in situ. And I think it is a great pity if that happens. In the teacher's guide for CSP, we have included a certificate, and we're suggesting that at the end of the 3 years that you as the CSPE teacher would see to it that students, maybe we suggest you putting your own crest onto this certificate, and that you would give a certificate to students to acknowledge the work that they have been doing in terms of CSPE. Conor, do you want to say something about the action record and the CBA?
Oh yeah, so when you're doing the CSPE course, it's understood really, whether it's a short course or whether it's part of well-being, that really you are following the specification, which is asking students to do one action with each strand or within each strand, and then to complete one action record as their CBA. So really, it's good practice, no matter which way you're doing CSPE, that students would actually do some kind of action record. And then, as Máirín said, you can certify it within the school, but it can also be certified within the junior cycle as part of the well-being component.
Very good. Okay, thanks for that, Conor.
Can I just say one other thing before you move on from that, Adam? And it's just this, that, you know, in many ways, I mean, when I talked about the purpose of teaching the subject and CSP and empowering young people and all of that, I think a really important question is to ask about ourselves is about the purpose of education. And really, CSPE is such an important subject in terms of how we educate our young people, how we prepare them for the world and that they're going to inhabit and they're going to live in. So I'm not going to get up on the soapbox, which I could very easily do. I'll let the next question go, but I suppose I'm making a case for saying really CSP is at the very heart of education in its entirety. Back to you,
absolutely. And can I just say, with regard to that, it's really important within the school to acknowledge that in some form and to recognize it.
Yeah.
Okay. That leads on to another question here. Does this CSP spec flow into Leaving Cert Politics and Society?
Gosh, it depends on what you mean by flow.
Yeah.
Politics and society, let's just mention quickly, it starts off with power and decision making. So all of the aspects of learning about decision making, about democracy, actually about many areas of CSPE, active learning, being involved in group work, all of that feeds directly in. Another key strand is human rights at home and human rights abroad. Wow. That's the fundamental strand of what CSP is built on. Okay, so we explore rights, we explore responsibilities, and we look at them locally, nationally, globally. So that feeds in perfectly. The other link is the action link. Students for Leaving Cert Politics and Society are required to do a citizenship project, which is a similar thing, but obviously it's upscaled because we're talking about students who are 16, 17, 18 years of age, who've developed their understanding and their skills and are doing a more, if I can put it this way, a more meaty action. So they both link in very clearly. Just one little personal comment. I think moves were made to distance the two subjects from each other. And actually, there is no need to distance the two subjects from each other. They're so closely connected, and they complement each other, and one definitely leads into the other.
Very good. Okay, thanks, Conor. There's a question here that you have covered in part earlier, but might be worth going into a little bit more detail on. It says, would it be possible to clarify the CBA for CSPE? Are students meant to complete a CBA, and are the action, what this person is referred to as the action projects, part of this? I know that this is something I asked you for clarification on another meeting, but it's something, I suppose, explaining exactly how the action and the CBA are linked is quite important, isn't it?
Okay. Will I kick off, Máirín?
Yes, Conor said he would deal with the questions around CBA, so they're all coming your way. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing is, action is action. Students doing things about an issue within the particular strand that they're studying at the time, and they are required to do one in each strand. So that should be roughly one action per year of the 3 years of the junior cycle. Okay. Now, we've already mentioned when you're doing action, it's important to gather evidence, bits and pieces. If you made posters or you fundraised or you know, whatever you did, that the students gather and keep those elements. Okay. And then if you kind of park that and say, well, that's the action bit done. The other bit is students have to produce an action record. Not like old CSPE, which was pretty much written only. I know they could do video and whatever, but by and large, it was written to a particular format. Students can now produce a PowerPoint, they can do a presentation, they could keep, you know, they could make a photo record or a video record, or they could do a written record. So what we're asking students, or what they're being asked to do, is having done the action now, to present that action and what they learned from it. And within the guidelines and within the textbook as well, and within the student activity book, there are those questions that students need to respond to. And we've put them in multiple formats. They're in different templates. At the back of the actual student activity book, we've put in a kind of report booklet that you could follow, which would suffice as your action record, but it's not prescriptive. We've also put in a piece where students can take photographs as they're doing their action as part of their action record. I hope that clarifies it.
Okay, great, thanks, Conor. We've just had a very nice comment in here. One teacher says that I've looked at the new book, and as a politics and society teacher, it definitely feeds in very well, which is great to hear. Thank you. And then a final question before I let you go and we announce the winner of our prize draw. Teacher asks, will your PowerPoints have links on the slides with relevant videos rather than in the 4th edition where they're at the end of units separate? So as I better take this, shall I? I can't say for sure, to be honest. It's ideally, yes, you would have links going out of the PowerPoints themselves. We have just upgraded our whole, well, Folens Hive it's now called. I'm not quite sure whether the technology is affected by links coming out of Microsoft products like that. There are knock-on effects when you link directly from either documents or PowerPoints, particularly if the direction or where the link winds up, if that changes, if there is any connection issues at a later point, it might affect the PowerPoint, which might have been a reason why they were taken out of the PowerPoints themselves in the last edition. But it's something we'll look at. I can see how they would be more convenient if the links did come straight out of them, but I can't say for sure at this stage, as we are we've uploaded or we've created some material for the digital support for the program right now, but we will complete that over the next few months. At the moment, I don't think any links come out of the PowerPoints, but we will look at it again and make a decision before school starts. Yeah, go ahead, Conor.
One quick comment, and it's this: I totally understand where that teacher is coming from, but also there's another challenge, I suppose, in that if we're trying to explore things from multiple perspectives and different understandings, we'd probably be reluctant to highlight only one video in each case, because, you know, and the other thing is there are so many videos coming on stream. It's a tricky one. I suppose that's the point. It's a tricky one. We might be able to suggest, we will always suggest videos, but we mightn't want people to be slavishly following them in a PowerPoint as the only one.
Okay, so provide a bank of them and let people choose and see a variety of perspectives, points of view. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Good point. Okay, I think that's all the questions that have come in from the attendees looked at. So thanks again, guys, for going through that. I think you've clarified a number of things and you've given a very broad and in-depth coverage of the program itself. I hope everybody looks forward to seeing the book and feels that any queries they've had have been covered. If I could do a drum roll now, I would, but we have pulled a winner, and Aoife Curran from Edmund Rice College in Cork. There will be a gourmet food and drink hamper heading to you. I'm not sure if either Aoife from our marketing department will maybe in contact with you to make sure she has the right address to send it to. So congratulations to you, and thanks for coming tonight. Conor and Máirín, is there anything else that you want to add tonight before we leave it?
I'd love to say thank you to everybody for coming along. I'll be really brief, Máirín, and you can come in then. I want to thank Adam and our editor, Tess Tattersall, whom we haven't mentioned tonight, for all of her advice and guidance and support. And Kieran Dean in Folens also deserves a mention. And I should also mention Conor Walker, who was working with us at the beginning of this process about a year ago. And of course, Adam, yourself, for your guidance and support through the process. But most of all, folks, I want to thank all of you for turning up and for using our book and our resource materials. So thank you very much. Máirín.
Yes, and just one last thing to say. Well, on the side there, it says to be sure and have a look at the books online. They're available to go through online at the moment. And in the teacher's guide, we're going to give you the option of letting us know, or letting your students letting us know how you're getting on or any issues that you have with the book. So watch out for that when the teacher's guide comes your way. But thank you all very much for being here.
I'd like to reiterate that too. Thanks again, everybody, for turning up. I know on an evening after a day's work, it's hard to log on yet again, considering we're all living online at the moment, so it's much appreciated. Okay, I'll let you go now. Conor, Máirín, talk to you soon. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.